In the late hours of the night, beneath a blanket of fog that envelops the city, the cobbled streets of London whisper tales of a shadow lurking in the darkness. The year is 1888. The bustling metropolis, a beacon of the industrial age, is gripped by fear, its heart pounding with the terror of the unknown. Here in the impoverished neighbourhoods of Whitechapel, a series of gruesome murders begins to unfold, each more horrifying than the last. The perpetrator, cloaked in midnight mist, earns a chilling moniker that echoes through the alleys and over the rooftops: Jack the Ripper. With no face to his name and no motive to unravel, his ghastly deeds paint a portrait of horror that haunts these streets to this day. Who was this enigmatic killer? Why were his crimes so barbaric, so brutal? And why, after more than a century, does the spectre of Jack the Ripper continue to haunt the annals of crime and mystery? Jack the Ripper, a name synonymous with terror, remains one of history's most notorious and elusive criminals. This unidentified assailant is believed to have brutally murdered at least 5 women in the East End of London, his reign of terror sending shockwaves that reverberated around the world. Even now, over a century later, the name Jack the Ripper has not faded into obscurity. Instead, it has burgeoned into a global phenomenon, encompassing everything from historical research to pop culture. From August to November 1888, the Ripper executed a series of killings that were both gruesome and methodical. The canonical 5 victims, Mary Ann Nichols, Annie Chapman, Elizabeth Stride, Catherine Eddowes and Mary Jane Kelly, were all women of Whitechapel, leading lives marred by hardship. Their murders were not merely acts of violence, they were brutal mutilations that suggested a killer of considerable cruelty and perhaps medical knowledge, or at least a morbid fascination with the human anatomy. Each crime scene was a macabre tableau, marked by precise, horrific cuts and, in some cases, the ghastly removal of organs. The savagery of the Ripper's acts drew not only the attention of the police, but also ignited an unprecedented media frenzy. Newspaper coverage was both morbid and sensational, fueling widespread panic and fascination that transcended the borders of the British Isles to echo across continents. As the investigation unfolded, numerous suspects were considered and countless theories proposed, yet no conclusive evidence was ever found. Jack the Ripper vanished into the shadows from which he had emerged, his identity shrouded in mystery. This unresolved case has inspired countless books, films, and debates, each attempting to answer the burning question: who was Jack the Ripper? Whitechapel, in the late 19th century, was the heart of London's East End and a stark contrast to the city's wealthier districts. This was a place teeming with life, but not the kind one might aspire to. Overcrowded and poverty-stricken, Whitechapel was a maze of narrow, winding streets and dilapidated housing, where the air was thick with the stench of industrial fumes and the cries of street vendors. Here, amidst the squalor and the ceaseless din of the urban underbelly, the majority of residents eked out a living on the fringes of society. Many were immigrants, especially from Eastern Europe, seeking a new life but finding only hardship. Work was scarce, with many turning to matchbox making, tailoring, or to the dockyards for day labour. Others found darker avenues to survive. Prostitution was one of the few options available for many women in the area, a dangerous and desperate means of securing the mere basics of survival. The pubs and gin shops were always full, providing brief respite from the harsh realities of daily life, though often fueling the fires of violence and crime. The police force was stretched thin, struggling to maintain order in an area where vice and violence were rampant. This combination of anonymity, poverty, and desperation created a volatile cocktail that was ripe for the type of brutality inflicted by Jack the Ripper. It was a place where someone could disappear into the fog, unnoticed and unmissed, their absence a silent void in the cacophony of the downtrodden. In this environment, a predator walked unchecked, his atrocities a grim commentary on the vulnerabilities of those who lived at society's margins. Whitechapel, a district marked by despair and neglect, became the stage for one of history's most chilling sequences of murder. The infamous Whitechapel murders are most closely associated with the tragic fates of 5 women, often referred to as the canonical 5. Each of these women lived and struggled within the harsh environs of Whitechapel, their lives marked by hardships that culminated in their brutal murders. Mary Ann Nichols, better known as Polly, was the first of the canonical victims. Found on August 31st, 1888, her life had been a tumultuous series of ups and downs, including a struggle with alcoholism and separation from her husband. Her body was discovered on Bucks Row, her throat slashed and abdomen mutilated. Annie Chapman, known as Dark Annie, met her fate just over a week later, on September 8th. Chapman had also suffered through a difficult life, grappling with alcohol and the death of her husband. She was found in the backyard of 29 Hanbury Street, similarly mutilated, her throat cut and body disemboweled. Elizabeth Stride, the third victim, was found on September 30th. Unlike the other victims, her body was less mutilated, suggesting her attacker may have been interrupted. Known as Long Liz, she was an immigrant from Sweden and had a history marked by domestic abuse and poverty. Later that same night, Catherine Eddowes was brutally murdered in Mitre Square. Her death was particularly gruesome, her throat slashed and her body horrifically mutilated, with organs removed and left at the scene. Her life, like those of the others, was fraught with hardship, often living on the streets. The final victim, Mary Jane Kelly, is believed to have been murdered on November 9th, inside her room at 13 Miller's Court. Her murder was by far the most savage, with her entire body being mutilated beyond recognition. Unlike the others, Kelly was younger and her background remains largely mysterious, shrouded in conflicting accounts. These 5 women, linked by their tragic ends, were victims not only of a ruthless killer, but of their vulnerable positions in society. Their murders highlight the grim reality of life for many women in the Victorian era, particularly in areas like Whitechapel. As the body count rose and panic ensued, the Metropolitan Police, led by officers like Inspectors Frederick Aberline and Edmund Reed, found themselves in a desperate race against an unseen adversary. The police were hampered not only by the cleverness of the criminal, but by the severe limitations of Victorian forensic science. At the time of the Ripper murders, forensic science was in its infancy. The concept of crime scene preservation was virtually non-existent. Crime scenes were often compromised by onlookers, and even the police themselves, who lacked formal training in evidence collection. Fingerprints were not yet accepted as a method of identification, and blood typing was unheard of. The police relied heavily on eyewitness accounts and basic detective work, which were fraught with inconsistencies and often led to dead ends. Investigators did attempt to use what technology they had, such as attempting to match handwriting samples from the infamous Dear Boss letters purportedly written by the Ripper. Without the tools to perform detailed forensic analyses, the police resorted to methods like door-to-door inquiries and patrols in areas where the Ripper was believed to frequent. They even employed bloodhounds in an attempt to track the killer, a tactic that ultimately failed due to lack of training and proper implementation. The limitations of forensic science not only stymied the investigation, but also allowed Jack the Ripper to vanish as mysteriously as he had appeared. The inability to gather conclusive evidence meant that many suspects were considered, but none could be definitively linked to the crimes. This lack of scientific support in the investigation left the police grappling in the dark, their efforts further complicated by the immense public and media pressure that demanded a resolution that would never come. While the police battled the limitations of forensic science and an elusive adversary, the media became a formidable force in shaping the narrative of the Jack the Ripper murders. Victorian London's newspapers played a crucial role, not only in reporting the facts but in sensationalising the events, fueling public fear and fascination. The Dear Boss letter, which famously gave the killer the moniker Jack the Ripper, is a perfect example of the media's influence. Received by the Central News Agency in late September 1888 and subsequently published, this letter, whether a hoax or genuinely penned by the murderer, ignited a media frenzy. Newspapers, eager to boost circulation, latched onto the chilling persona of Jack the Ripper. The coverage was often speculative and lurid, with detailed accounts of the gruesome nature of the murders. This not only terrified the public, but also crowded the investigation with a plethora of false leads and hoaxes, as attention seekers and panicked citizens flooded the police with information. Journalists and editors used the Ripper story to criticise the police and the state of law enforcement. This public scrutiny added immense pressure on the investigators, pushing them to make arrests and solve the case quickly, which in many instances led to hasty and uncoordinated actions. The Ripper's media coverage not only reflected the public's morbid curiosity, but also revealed the power of the press to influence public opinion and official responses to crime. It created a legacy where the figure of Jack the Ripper transcended the crimes themselves, becoming a symbol of terror and a subject of myth that would persist through the ages. As the investigation into the Whitechapel murders progressed, several suspects emerged, each accompanied by their own compelling and sometimes controversial theories. These suspects ranged from a barrister and a schoolteacher to a notorious quack doctor. Monteague John Druitt, a figure marked by tragedy and mystery, remains one of the more enigmatic suspects in the Jack the Ripper case. A barrister by profession and a schoolteacher by occupation, Druitt was described by those who knew him as a quiet and private individual, perhaps concealing the turmoil that later events would suggest. Druitt's body was discovered floating in the Thames in early December 1888, mere weeks after the murder of Mary Jane Kelly, the Ripper's last known victim. His death was ruled a suicide, with personal items weighed down in his pockets, indicating a deliberate intent to drown. This tragic end came swiftly after his dismissal from a teaching position, which some speculate was due to undisclosed reasons that could be linked to the ongoing murders. The timing of his death has led some to theorise that Druitt might have been Jack the Ripper, overwhelmed by guilt or fear of imminent exposure. Supporters of this theory point to a supposed surgical knowledge, which they argue could align with the anatomical precision suggested by the Ripper's mutilations. However, there is little concrete evidence that Druitt possessed such medical skills. His legal and educational background offers no clear connection to the anatomical expertise required for such grisly acts. Additionally, Druitt's social standing and familial connections raise questions about this theory. His family was well respected, with ties to both the legal and medical professions, adding layers of complexity to his character and potential motivations. Following his death, a family member described him as not quite right in the head, a vague but haunting hint at possible mental health struggles. Despite the intrigue surrounding his death and the proximity of his demise to the Ripper's last known murder, the evidence against Monteague John Druitt is circumstantial at best. His inclusion as a suspect relies heavily on conjecture and the unfortunate timing of his untimely death, leaving many questions unanswered and his role in the gruesome saga of Jack the Ripper a subject of ongoing debate. Severin Klosowski, who later assumed the name George Chapman, presents a fascinating yet paradoxical figure in the annals of suspected Ripper lore. Born in Poland and migrating to England, Chapman settled in Whitechapel, where he worked as a barber surgeon. a profession that afforded him a rudimentary knowledge of medicine and anatomy. Chapman's life took a dark turn long after the Ripper murders ceased. In the early 1900s, he was convicted of poisoning 3 of his wives, showing a methodical cruelty that led some to speculate about his capacity for murder during his earlier years in Whitechapel. His choice of poison as a weapon was starkly different from the brutal physical mutilations attributed to Jack the Ripper, suggesting a different modus operandi. Despite these differences, proponents of Chapman as a Ripper suspect point to his medical knowledge and his proximity to the crime scenes during the time of the murders. They speculate that perhaps Chapman evolved in his methods of killing, or that he might have been capable of far more violent acts in his younger years. Further fueling this theory is the psychological profile some experts have attempted to reconstruct. They argue that the calculated nature of his later poisonings could suggest a cold, calculating mind, capable of the Ripper's surgical-style mutilations. Yet this remains speculative, with no direct evidence linking Chapman to the Ripper crimes, apart from geographic coincidence and a shared medical background. Scotland Yard detective Frederick Aberline, one of the primary investigators of the Ripper case, reportedly expressed suspicions about Chapman, but was unable to find concrete evidence to support his theory. Chapman's eventual conviction for the unrelated murders of his wives, however, permanently marked him as a man capable of extreme deception and lethal malice. While the argument for Chapman as Jack the Ripper is intriguing and adds another layer of mystery to the infamous case, it ultimately raises more questions than answers. The dramatic shift in modus operandi, from violent mutilation to secretive poisoning, casts doubt on this theory, leaving historians and crime enthusiasts to ponder the enigmatic depths of human deceit and brutality. Aaron Kosminski, a Polish barber living in the heart of Whitechapel, has emerged as one of the more controversial suspects in the Jack the Ripper case, primarily due to a piece of evidence brought to light over a century after the murders. This evidence involves a shawl that was purportedly found at the scene of Catherine Edow's murder, one of the Ripper's victims. In 2014, an amateur sleuth and a molecular biologist published a study claiming that DNA recovered from the shawl matched relatives of both Edow's and Kosminski, suggesting a direct link between the suspect and the victim. This finding sparked a media sensation, as it appeared to provide the concrete evidence that had eluded investigators for decades. However, the DNA analysis quickly came under intense scrutiny from both the scientific community and Ripperologists. Critics pointed out significant issues, such as the shawl's dubious provenance. There is no concrete historical record confirming it was indeed at the crime scene. Furthermore, the conditions under which the shawl was kept for over a century could have led to contamination, complicating any attempt to conclusively link the DNA to Kosminski. Kosminski himself was a known figure to the police at the time of the murders. Described as having severe mental health issues, he was eventually committed to an asylum. His behaviour and proximity to the murder sites made him a plausible suspect, yet there was never any physical evidence directly connecting him to the crimes, apart from the contested shawl analysis. Despite the intriguing genetic findings, many experts maintain that without more reliable forensic evidence, the case against Kosminski remains speculative. The debate over his potential guilt highlights the complexities of using modern science to solve historical crimes, where the passage of time obscures more than it reveals. As it stands, Aaron Kosminski is a figure shrouded in both mystery and tragedy, his story entwined with one of history's most chilling unsolved cases. Whether he was indeed Jack the Ripper may forever remain a question unanswered, a haunting spectre in the annals of criminal history. Among the myriad of names suggested in connection with the Jack the Ripper murders, Hyams is one that has occasionally surfaced, though he is far less known than some of the more publicised suspects. Hyams was a Polish Jew who lived in the East End of London during the time of the Ripper murders, an area teeming with immigrants and fraught with tension. Hyams first drew attention due to his unfortunate mental health decline, which coincided with the period of the Ripper murders. Reports from the time indicate that Hyams suffered from episodes of severe delusions and paranoia, conditions that led to his eventual commitment to an asylum shortly after the last of the canonical murders in 1888. Supporters of Hyams as a suspect point to his psychological profile and proximity to the murder sites as circumstantial evidence. They speculate that his mental state could have driven him to commit such heinous acts, though, like many theories surrounding various suspects, concrete evidence linking Hyams directly to the crimes is lacking. Moreover, there were no eyewitness accounts or physical evidence to place him at any of the crime scenes. The suggestion of Hyams as a suspect relies heavily on the coincidence of his mental health issues with the timing of the murders and his presence in the same locale. Hyams's story is a poignant reminder of the broader social issues of the time, reflecting how quickly those with mental health problems could become ensnared in criminal investigations, often based more on public fear and misunderstanding than on factual evidence. While the debate continues over who truly was Jack the Ripper, Hyams remains a peripheral figure in this enduring mystery. His inclusion in the list of potential suspects serves as a testament to the era's complexities and the desperation to find answers in a case that has puzzled experts and enthusiasts for over a century. Francis Tumblety, an American self-proclaimed doctor, stands out among the suspects for his flamboyant personality and mysterious behaviours. Known for his ostentatious style and boastful manner, Tumblety made a fortune selling patent medicines, which were often little more than dubious concoctions. Tumblety's antics were not limited to mere quackery. He was known for his intense misogyny, reportedly holding deep-seated resentments towards women, particularly prostitutes. This aspect of his personality drew significant attention when he was in London during the Ripper murders, a city and time plagued by deep fears and suspicions. In November 1888, amid the height of the Ripper's terror, Tumblety was arrested on charges unrelated to the murders, specifically gross indecency. However, his name was soon linked to the ongoing investigation due to his peculiar medical interests, including a collection of uteri, which he allegedly showed off to guests. This morbid fascination, coupled with his anti-feminist views, cast a shadow of suspicion over him. Before he could be questioned thoroughly regarding the Ripper cases, Tumblety fled England, escaping to France and eventually returning to the United States. This abrupt departure only intensified the suspicions surrounding him, leading some to speculate whether his flight was an admission of guilt or merely an attempt to avoid persecution for his other legal troubles. Back in America, Tumblety continued his medical charlatanism, but the shadow of the Ripper followed him. Despite extensive investigations, no concrete evidence was ever uncovered to directly link Tumblety to the murders, and he remained a free man until his death. Francis Tumblety's life was marked by spectacle and controversy. Whether he was truly capable of being Jack the Ripper remains a topic of debate among historians and crime enthusiasts. His story encapsulates the enduring allure of the Ripper mystery, a tale woven through with accusations, escape, and the ever-elusive shadow of truth. Among the most sensational theories concerning Jack the Ripper involves none other than the British royal family. This theory proposes that the Ripper murders were orchestrated at the highest levels of British society, possibly as part of a cover-up involving the royal family itself. According to proponents of this theory, Prince Albert Victor, Duke of Clarence and grandson of Queen Victoria, was at the centre of the scandal. The theory suggests that the prince secretly married or fathered a child with a commoner, possibly linked to one of the victims, and that the murders were committed to silence those who knew of this liaison. Further embellishments claim that Sir William Gull, the Queen's physician, was recruited to carry out the murders to protect the royal name. These theories often cite supposed Masonic rituals and symbolism in the killings, adding another layer of mystery and conspiracy. Despite its dramatic appeal, the royal conspiracy theory is widely dismissed by serious scholars and historians. It is criticised for its reliance on sensationalist accounts and a conspicuous lack of hard evidence. Most experts argue that it distracts from more plausible explanations rooted in the social and economic realities of the time. Yet, the theory persists, fueled by its blend of royal intrigue and the dark allure of a cover-up at the highest levels. It speaks to our collective fascination with power and secrecy, and how these elements can intertwine with the most notorious unsolved crimes in history. In the end, the royal conspiracy theory remains just that, a theory, one of many that continue to make the case of Jack the Ripper as compelling as it is mysterious. As forensic science has evolved, so too has the approach to solving historical crimes. In the case of Jack the Ripper, modern forensic techniques, especially DNA testing, have been applied with the hope of finally uncovering the identity of the infamous murderer. One of the most publicised examples of these efforts involved the analysis of a shawl allegedly found at one of the Ripper's crime scenes. Scientists claimed to have extracted DNA that matched both the victim and a known suspect, a breakthrough that made headlines worldwide. However, the use of DNA testing in the Ripper case has not been without its detractors. Critics point out significant issues, such as the risk of contamination and the dubious provenance of artefacts like the shawl. After more than a century, proving a chain of custody for these items is nearly impossible, and DNA degradation over time further complicates the reliability of the results. Moreover, these forensic re-evaluations often rely on partial or degraded genetic samples, which can lead to inconclusive or misleading interpretations. The excitement of potentially solving the case must be balanced with the rigorous demands of scientific inquiry. Despite these challenges, the application of modern forensics has undeniably enriched the field of historical crime investigation. It has opened new avenues for analysis, not only in the Ripper case, but also in other cold cases around the world. Whether or not forensic science will ever conclusively solve the mystery of Jack the Ripper remains to be seen. The debate continues, as does the fascination with this chilling chapter in criminal history, demonstrating both the capabilities and the limits of modern science. Alongside forensic re-evaluations, psychological profiling has become an essential tool in the attempt to understand not just who Jack the Ripper might have been, but why he might have committed such brutal acts. Criminal profilers have analysed the existing evidence to construct a profile of the type of individual capable of such heinous crimes. The Ripper's crimes, characterised by extreme violence and precise mutilations, suggest a person with a complex and disturbed psyche. Profilers speculate that the killer likely had a deep-seated animosity toward women, possibly stemming from personal trauma or societal influences. Experts often describe the Ripper as having surgical or anatomical knowledge, indicated by the specific removal of organs and the methodical dissection of the victims' bodies. This level of precision might suggest someone who is methodical, controlled, and possesses a calm demeanour amidst chaos, traits often associated with psychopathic personalities. Additionally, the Ripper's ability to evade capture, moving stealthily through the streets of Whitechapel, implies a high level of cunning and familiarity with the area. He was likely someone who blended into the community, perhaps appearing as a normal, even charming individual to those he encountered. Criminal profilers also consider the timing and location of the murders, noting that they occurred during weekends or near holidays, times when the streets were busier and the police presence might have been diluted. This pattern suggests strategic planning and an understanding of human behaviour and police procedures. While psychological profiling provides a chilling glimpse into what kind of person might have been capable of such atrocities, It is important to remember that these profiles are speculative. They offer potential insights, but cannot conclusively identify the Ripper. As with all aspects of the Jack the Ripper case, psychological profiling adds another layer to our understanding, pushing us to consider not just the who, but the why behind these infamous murders, continuing to engage and mystify us more than a century later. The legacy of Jack the Ripper extends far beyond the dark streets of Victorian London. Over a century later, the Ripper's name still evokes a mixture of fear, fascination, and morbid curiosity. Why does this historical figure, whose crimes were committed in such a different era, continue to captivate and terrify us? The mystery of Jack the Ripper endures largely because of the unknown. With no definitive resolution to his identity, each generation revisits and reimagines the Ripper's story through new lenses, be it in films, books, or television series. This continuing reinterpretation keeps the Ripper relevant, allowing him to haunt the public imagination, much like he haunted the streets of Whitechapel. Moreover, the Ripper's anonymity allows him to embody our deepest fears about the unknown lurking among us. He becomes a figure of ultimate evil, hidden behind an everyday facade, a reminder that monsters are not always distinguishable in a crowd. This unresolved nature of his crimes provides a blank canvas for our fears and theories to paint upon. The Ripper also serves as a chilling case study in the limitations of law enforcement and forensic science of the time. His ability to evade capture speaks to our fear of justice unfulfilled and evil unpunished. It raises uncomfortable questions about other modern mysteries and whether they too might go unsolved. Finally, the Ripper phenomenon reflects our collective intrigue with the macabre. In a world preoccupied with understanding the motives behind criminal behaviour, Jack the Ripper stands as an enigma, an unsolvable puzzle that challenges our need for answers and closure. As we reflect on the legacy of Jack the Ripper, it becomes clear that sometimes the fear of the unknown proves the most enduring. His shadow looms large, not because of the crimes themselves, but because of what they represent, the dark corners of human nature and the mysteries that remain hidden within.